The smell of freshly ground coffee always reminds me of Virginia. She brewed it every morning, filling our little house with the aroma that signaled the beginning of a new day. 10 years have passed, and I still brew coffee the way she taught me. Slowly, letting the water run through each grain. My hands aren't what they used to be. 71 years have taken their toll. My joints ache in the mornings, especially when it's humid. Today is just such a day in North Little Rock. The fog is rolling in over the Arkansas River, and my old back feels it. I glance at my watch, 5:30 in the morning. The old chef's habit of getting up before dawn hasn't gone away, even though I haven't stood at the stove in my restaurant in a long time, at least not every day. Old Wharf is what I called it 26 years ago, when the neighborhood was still an industrial area with a couple of rundown diners. No one believed a decent establishment could operate here. No one but Virginia and me. I poured coffee into my favorite mug with the cracked glaze. Virginia wanted to throw it away about 15 years ago, but I wouldn't let her. "This mug is like me, honey. Shabby but still holding its shape," I joked. She laughed and then kissed my forehead, her hand smelling of lavender soap. The kitchen window overlooked the river. I used to live on the other side of town, but after Virginia died, I moved into the apartment above the restaurant. Merritt said then that it was pathetic, an old man living above his diner. If she knew how much that diner and that apartment overlooking the river cost, but I never told her. Why? To see how her attitude towards me would change? No, I'm too old for that kind of game. I finish my coffee and start packing. Even though the restaurant doesn't open until 11, I'm always there by 7 to check supplies and talk to the staff before the day begins. My closet is simple: dark pants, a light-colored shirt, comfortable shoes, and an old tweed jacket with elbow patches. Merritt calls me an old-fashioned poor man. Well, looks can be deceiving. I go downstairs and open the service entrance. The morning air smells like the river and wet asphalt. I love that smell. It reminds me of the beginning when I first opened Old Wharf and met every delivery at this very spot myself. "Good morning, Mr. A. Rowan Page, my chef and deputy, is already here, even though it's only 6:45. "Rowan, you're too early." I shake my head, but smile. This guy reminds me of myself when I was younger, just as obsessed, just as in love with the kitchen. "We have a big group for dinner tonight. Wanted to check the supplies." He helps me to the door, though I'm doing fine on my own. "I'm not an invalid kid," I grumble, but I don't mean it. "I know, sir. But my mom raised me to respect my elders." He smiles, and I see him as the son Virginia and I never had. "Rowan's been with me for 9 years. Came here as an inexperienced cook, and now he runs the kitchen better than I did when I was his age. If Merritt had any interest in my life, she'd know about him, but she's only been here twice in the last 5 years, and both times when she needed money. The restaurant is already bustling with activity. Jenny, our hostess, is arranging fresh flowers on the tables. Her hands move with the grace of a dancer. "Mr. Endicott, there's a vegetable delivery." She nods toward the back door. "Thank you, sweetheart," I reply, heading toward the warehouse. Tommy, our vegetable supplier, is already unloading boxes. He's a third-generation farmer, and his produce is the best around. "Birch, look at the tomatoes I brought in today." He holds one out to me, heavy and ripe. "Take a bite." I take a bite and the juice runs down my chin, sweet, with sourness. Perfect. "I'll take it all," I nod, and Tommy brightens. Moments like this are true riches. Not the money in the accounts or the property, but the taste of a perfect tomato and the smile of the man who grew it. By 8, the rest of the staff arrives. Our cooks, waiters, bartenders, many have worked with me for years. Some call me sentimental, but I prefer to think of us as a family, the kind of family I chose. "Mr. A, we have a problem with our reservation for tomorrow." Lori, our receptionist, approaches me. "The Hayes group is asking for a table for 6, but we're all booked up." My brother-in-law's last name makes me wince. Fletcher Hayes, a narcissistic turkey who treats me like a poor relative even though he's up to his eyeballs in loans. Merritt chose him for his status, not realizing that half of his stories about rich clients and powerful friends are fiction. Are they planning to celebrate here? I ask, hiding my surprise. Yeah, they said it's for Mr. Hayes's promotion. Lori looks at me questioningly. What should I tell them? I wonder. My own daughter is going to celebrate at my restaurant without even realizing it's mine. Ironic. Find a place for them, Lori, and don't tell them I'll be here. She nods without asking questions. Another reason I appreciate my employees. They respect my privacy. By 10:30, the restaurant is ready to open. I walk around the room, checking every detail, from the table arrangements to the lighting. Many restaurant owners have long since stopped attending to such minutiae, but not me. The old wharf is an extension of myself, my legacy. I watch Rowan brief the staff, explaining today's specials. He speaks confidently, but without arrogance. He's a good guy. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if Merritt had chosen someone like him over Fletcher. Merritt, my only daughter. 46 years old and still trying to prove something to the world, like a little girl that Virginia and I couldn't give expensive toys to. I remember her crying at 12 when we couldn't buy her a designer jacket like her classmate Bella Carpenter's. "Everyone will laugh at me," she yelled, and Virginia tried to explain that we couldn't afford such a luxury. We were really poor then. I was working as a cook in someone else's restaurant, Virginia as an elementary school teacher. That all changed when I won a regional cooking competition and received a grant to open my own place. But by then, Merritt had already formed her opinion of us, losers to be ashamed of. She went to college on a scholarship, which I secretly paid for by working 18 hours a day. Virginia wanted to tell her the truth, but I insisted that Merritt should think she'd achieved everything on her own. Maybe that was a mistake. In college, she met Fletcher, the son of an insurance agent who introduced himself as a top-tier financial advisor. She was fascinated by his tales of wealthy clients and social life. When she brought him to meet us, he barely concealed his contempt for our humble home and my profession. "A cook?" he interjected at the time. "Interesting. And in what kind of restaurant?" By then, the old wharf was in its third year of operation, but it was known only in small circles. I could have said I owned my own restaurant, but something held me back. Maybe the look in Fletcher's eyes, assessing the value of every item in our house. Maybe the way Merritt looked at him, with an adoration I'd never seen when she looked at me or Virginia. "In a little place by the river," I answered then. It was nothing special. After they were married, Merritt began to visit us less and less often, especially when Ayla was born. Virginia suffered, but she never showed it. She traveled by herself, bringing gifts for her granddaughter, trying to keep in touch. I, on the other hand, immersed myself in work, expanding the restaurant, opening a catering service, investing in real estate around here. By the time Ayla turned 5, the old wharf had become one of the most successful restaurants in town, and I was a wealthy man. But Merritt and Fletcher knew nothing. They continued to treat us like poor relatives tolerated out of politeness. Virginia wanted to put them in their place, show them our real home, accounts, business. "Why would we want to do that?" I asked her. "So they'll love us for money? No. Let them treat us as we are. At least it's honest." When Virginia got sick, Merritt came rarely. Too busy, too much work, too far to travel. I didn't blame her. Didn't want to waste energy on resentment when all I had left were the last few months with my wife. Virginia was fading before my eyes, but she worried about her daughter and granddaughter until her last day. "Promise me you won't leave them," she whispered to me that last night. "They're our blood, Birch, the only thing left behind." I promised, even though I knew Merritt didn't need me. She had structured her life to keep me on the periphery. After the funeral, she helped me sell the house. "It's too big for you alone, Dad. not knowing I had an apartment above a restaurant worth 3 times as much as that house. I gave the money from the sale to her, for Ayla's education. Fletcher wasn't happy. He was expecting more. Well, I wasn't going to dissuade him. "Mr. Endicott," Laurie's voice brought me back to the present. "The first guests have arrived. It's 11 o'clock. Time to open the doors." I nod and go to greet the guests, an elderly couple who come every Saturday for lunch. Mrs. Caldwell smiles at me. Her husband shakes my hand. "Birch, darling, how are you doing?" she asks, and in her eyes I see genuine concern. "Never better, Eleanor," I reply. And it's true. I have this restaurant, my people, my guests. I'm not a rich man in a $1,000 suit like Fletcher imagines. I'm just a man who's found his place in life. I escort the Caldwell couple to their table by the window. The day begins. My daughter and her family are coming here tomorrow, and they won't even know they're eating at their poor father and grandfather's restaurant. Ironic? Yeah. Does it hurt? Sometimes. But that's the life I've chosen. Through the glass doors of the restaurant, I can see the city waking up. North Little Rock has never been big or bustling, but in recent years it's been changing, becoming more vibrant. And so have I myself. Who would have thought a 70-year-old widower could feel more alive than ever? My gaze stops on a picture of Virginia hanging in an inconspicuous corner of the bar. She's smiling that special smile that was always just for me. I kept my promise, sweetheart, I think. I didn't leave them behind, just doing it my way. The phone call rang in the middle of the afternoon as I was going over the invoices in my office. Merritt's name popped up on the screen. She rarely called, usually when she needed something, so I braced myself for another request for money. "Yes, Merritt," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad," her tone was businesslike, as if she were talking to an unfamiliar customer. "It's Ayla's birthday in 3 days. 23 years old. We're having a little dinner on Thursday, 7 o'clock at night. She's asked that you come too." She asked. Not, "We want you to come." Not, "We'd love to have you." No, my granddaughter asked, and my daughter fulfills it as an unpleasant obligation. "Of course I'll come," I replied, not showing how I was hurt by her tone. "Thank you for the invitation. Just please don't be late like last time," she added. She faltered. "I don't need any extravagant gifts. You know these are difficult times for everyone." It was her way of reminding me of my modest financial situation, as if I could forget the role I had played all these years. "Don't worry," I said. "Nothing extravagant." "Good." She was clearly in a hurry to end the conversation. "I'll see you Thursday then. Bye, Dad." She hung up before I could say goodbye. Typical of Merritt. Always in a hurry, always feeling like talking to me was a waste of her precious time. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the picture of Ayla on my desk. A picture from 5 years ago when she graduated from college. I hadn't been to her graduation. Merritt had told me that seating was limited, and they'd called Fletcher's parents because they'd helped with the tuition. In fact, half of the tuition was covered by me through an anonymous trust fund I set up for my granddaughter, but only my attorney and I knew about it. Sighing, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was an antique brooch, a silver lily with a small pearl in the center. It had belonged to my mother, and before her, to my grandmother. Virginia had kept it for Merritt, but our daughter had never shown any interest in old-fashioned trinkets. Now I've decided to give it to Ayla. She probably won't appreciate it either, but it's the last family heirloom I have left. I closed the restaurant earlier than usual on Thursday, leaving Rowan to handle the final details. Merritt and Fletcher's house was in an upscale neighborhood, a 3-story brick mansion with columns and a manicured lawn. They'd bought it 3 years ago with a huge mortgage. Fletcher boasted that it was an investment in the future, but I knew from my banker, who was also Fletcher's banker, that they were barely keeping up with the monthly payments. Pulling up to the house, I parked my old Toyota between Fletcher's gleaming Lexus and some sports car, probably belonging to one of their guests. My car looked out of place in that driveway, as did I myself at their parties. I put the box with the brooch in the inside pocket of my jacket, next to an envelope that contained a check for a substantial sum of money, my real gift to Ayla that no one would ever know about. The money would go to the same trust fund she didn't even know existed. The door was opened by Ayla herself. Her blonde hair was gathered into an elegant style, and her eyes flashed something like genuine joy when she saw me. "Grandpa!" She hugged me lightly, and I smelled the scent of expensive perfume. "You've come." "Of course I came," I smiled. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I handed her a small bouquet, nothing fancy, just the white lilies that Virginia had always loved. "Thank you. They're beautiful." Ayla took the flowers, and for a moment I saw my late wife in her, the same tilt of her head, the same genuine smile. "Is Daddy here?" Merritt's voice from the back of the house shattered the moment. She appeared in the hallway, dressed in an elegant black dress that I was sure cost more than she could afford. "Hello, Merritt." I stepped forward to hug her, but she limited herself to a formal kiss on the cheek. "You're just in time," she said in a tone that was rare. "Come on in. Everyone's already gathered." I followed her into the spacious living room where a group of well-dressed people stood with glasses in their hands. Fletcher, in a suit that screamed of its expensiveness, was talking to two men about his own age. When he saw me, he feigned a smile that did not touch his eyes. "Ah, Birch," he approached, extending his hand. "Glad you were able to get out." Get out. It was like I was living in the middle of nowhere instead of downtown. "Thanks for the invitation, Fletcher." I shook his hand, sensing the falseness in his shake. "Let me introduce you to my colleagues," he gestured to the men. "This is Harrison Winslow, our vice president, and Pierce Aldridge, our chief investment strategist. Gentlemen, this is Birch Endicott, Merritt's father." "Nice to meet you," Harrison said with the kind of politeness that borders on disdain. "You work in the catering business, I believe?" Pierce asked, his tone clearly condescending. "Yes, in the catering business," I answered simply, without elaborating. "Birch is a cook," Fletcher interjected with a strained smile. "A little restaurant by the river. What's it called, Birch?" "The Old Wharf." "The Old Wharf," I corrected, wondering how he'd managed to forget the name of the place where his wife had grown up. I often took little Merritt into the kitchen with me, teaching her how to bake cookies and make pasta. But I guess those memories weren't worth keeping. "Right." Fletcher waved his hand nonchalantly. "Harrison just bought a steak in Blue Harbor, you know, that new upscale restaurant on River Drive. Terrific place. You should stop by sometime. Although," he grinned, "it's pretty expensive." Blue Harbor had only been open a month and was a direct competitor to the Old Wharf. Only their chef couldn't match Rowan's, and the interior was too pretentious for the local crowd. I knew from my suppliers that they were already struggling financially. "I've heard of it," I said neutrally. "I hope it's a good investment." Harrison smiled smugly. "Oh, it certainly is. We're already getting offers from several restaurant groups looking to buy franchises." I knew that was a lie. No one would buy a franchise of a restaurant that hadn't yet proven to be profitable, but I just nodded, maintaining an expression of polite interest. "Dad," Merritt walked over and took me under her arm. "Let me show you where you're sitting." She took me to the far end of the long dining table, obviously as far away from the center as possible, where Ayla and the important guests were supposed to sit. "Here?" I asked, pointing to the card with my name on it. "Yes." She adjusted the flower arrangement on the table. "I thought you'd be more comfortable here. Not as noisy. In other words, away from everyone so I don't embarrass them with my presence." "Of course," I agreed. "Very thoughtful of you." Merritt looked at me suspiciously, trying to see if I was being sarcastic, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'll be right back," she said, noticing that new guests had entered the room. I was alone, watching Merritt and Fletcher greet an older couple, apparently Fletcher's parents, judging by the resemblance. Mr. Hayes was a tall, statuesque man with silver temples, his wife a well-groomed woman with a strained smile and perfect posture. They hugged Ayla, handing her a large gift box. I hadn't met them since Merritt's wedding 25 years ago. Back then, they hadn't even tried to hide their disappointment at their son's choice. "A teacher and a cook," I heard Mrs. Hayes whisper to one of the guests. "Fletcher was always too generous." "Grandpa?" Ayla came up to me with a glass in her hand. "Don't you miss me?" "Not now," I smiled. "Happy birthday again. 23 is a wonderful age." "Thank you." She sat down next to me. "I'm sorry about, you know, Mom and Dad. They just—" "Don't apologize," I interrupted gently. "It's okay. I'm glad I could make it." She smiled, and there was something genuine in that smile, not like her parents' polished smiles. "I'm glad you came too. We don't get to see each other that much." "It's my fault," I lied, not wanting to turn her against her parents. "I've been working a lot." "At that restaurant? Still?" she asked with slight surprise. "You're already— how old? 71? "Yes, still there," I nodded. "And yes, 71. But you know, work keeps me in shape." "I guess." She looked at me thoughtfully. "I've never been to your restaurant. It's weird, isn't it?" "A little," I agreed, suppressing the urge to tell her the truth. "Maybe you could stop by sometime?" "Maybe," she shrugged, but I could see it was unlikely. The Old Wharf was a place her parents didn't talk about in their social circle. "I have something for you," I said, pulling out a velvet box. "This belonged to your great-grandmother and her mother before her." Ayla opened the box with interest. The brooch sparkled in the light of the chandelier, the pearl glowing softly. "Wow," she exhaled, gingerly touching the silver petals. "It's beautiful." "Your grandmother Virginia wanted the women in our family to have it," I said quietly. "Now it's yours." "What's going on here?" Merritt sprang up beside us, her gaze immediately falling on the brooch. "What is it?" "My grandfather gave me a family jewel." Ayla showed her the brooch with admiration. "It belonged to her great-grandmother." Merritt took the box from her daughter's hands, examining it critically. "It's just an old trinket," she said, and I saw Ayla's smile fade. "The silver is tarnished, and the pearls are probably fake." "They're real pearls," I objected calmly. "And silver can be cleaned." "Papa," Merritt lowered her voice as if she was afraid someone might hear. "I appreciate you wanting to give me a gift, but Ayla is 23. She's a modern girl. She's not going to wear such antique things." "Actually, I like it," Ayla intervened, taking the brooch from her mother. "It's unique, and it has a history." Merritt pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy that her daughter didn't support her. "Well, if you like it, but don't expect to wear it to any decent event. It's too old-fashioned." "I'll wear it whenever I want," Ayla said firmly, and I saw a glimmer of character in her that her parents couldn't quite suppress. Merritt was about to reply, but she was interrupted by the clinking of glasses as Fletcher called everyone to the table. "It's time for dinner," she said with a strained smile. "Ayla, dear, your place is in the center. Daddy, you're over there at the end of the table." I nodded and headed to my seat, feeling Ayla's gaze on me. I knew Merritt would try to minimize my interaction with her granddaughter during the evening, but I was glad for even this brief conversation. The dinner was exquisite but bland, like most things in Merritt and Fletcher's home. Expensive, but without soul. I ate in silence, watching the other guests socialize, laughing, exchanging stories from which I was excluded. Fletcher stood up, raising his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to our beautiful daughter," he began. "Ayla, you are our pride and joy. Your achievements in marketing are already impressive, and you're just starting out." Everyone clapped, and I thought about the fact that Ayla's accomplishments were mostly about getting jobs through Fletcher's connections. It wasn't that she wasn't capable, It was just that she'd never really had to fight for anything. And I'd like to announce, Fletcher continued, that in honor of Ayla's birthday and my recent promotion, we're taking the whole family out for the weekend to the Blue Harbor, the best restaurant in town. The guests hummed in approval. I suppressed a smile at the thought that they would be disappointed. Blue Harbor was still a raw project with inconsistent quality. And the day after tomorrow, Fletcher added, his voice even more smug, we're going to celebrate my promotion at another great place, the Old Wharf Restaurant. I almost choked on my wine. They were going to celebrate at my restaurant. Tomorrow. They say the food's pretty good, Fletcher said, giving me a condescending look. It's not as fine as Blue Harbor's, though. I've heard good things about the Old Wharf, said one of the guests, an elegant, middle-aged woman. Didn't their chef win some prestigious award last year? Yes, he did, I confirmed, not specifying that Rowan had been named best chef in Arkansas by the most respected culinary magazine. Were you there, Dad? Merritt asked with slight surprise. Sometimes, I answered evasively. Wow, she looked a little puzzled. I didn't know you could afford places like this. Oh, I didn't say I eat there, I smiled. I just go in once in a while. Fletcher laughed, and his laughter was echoed by the other guests, obviously finding it amusing that someone like me could be a customer at a decent restaurant. Anyway, he raised his glass even higher. Here's to Ayla, to her bright future. To Ayla, the guests echoed. I raised my glass too, meeting my granddaughter's gaze across the table. She smiled weakly at me, and in her eyes I saw something like an apology. When dessert was eaten and coffee was served, I decided I had done my social duty and could leave. I quietly stood up and walked over to Ayla, who was talking to a young man, judging from their interaction, her boyfriend. Ayla, honey, I have to go, I said. I have to get up early tomorrow. Oh, you're leaving already? She looked a little disappointed. Thanks for coming, Grandpa, and for the brooch. It's really special. She hugged me, and for a moment I felt that there was a real connection between us despite Merritt's best efforts. Is Birch leaving? Fletcher appeared beside us, his face flushed from the wine he'd drunk. So soon? We haven't even cut the cake yet. I have to work tomorrow, I explained. Thanks for the invitation. Work? Work? He shook his head with exaggerated sympathy. At your age, you still have to work. Merritt and I hope to be retired by the time we're 60. We have a solid pension fund, you know. I knew that their solid fund barely covered their monthly expenses, but I didn't say anything. Some of us like working, I said simply. Sure, he patted my shoulder condescendingly. Well, I'll see you someday. Merritt didn't even come out to see me off. Ayla walked me to the door, gave me another hug, and promised to call soon. A promise I knew she was unlikely to keep through no fault of her own. As I got into my car, I looked up at the lighted windows of the house where my family was celebrating without me. Tomorrow they'll come to my restaurant, unaware of whose restaurant it really is. Well, perhaps it was time for a little surprise. It had been a troublesome morning. One of the suppliers had delayed the delivery of fresh fish, and Rowan was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Mr. A, what do we do? The fish was supposed to arrive 3 hours ago, and we have a full booking today. He nervously thumbed through the reservation list. Take it easy, Rowan. I put my hand on his shoulder. Marco always has fresh catch at the market. Send Jason there right now, and I'll call Marco to put aside the best for us. Rowan looked at me gratefully. What would we do without you, Mr. A? You'd do just fine, I smiled. Speaking of tonight's reservations, is the Hayes table for 8 o'clock tonight still on? Rowan nodded, looking at the list. Yes, confirmed yesterday. 6 people. Table number 9, center of the room, as you requested. I nodded. The best table in the restaurant, overlooking the river and conveniently located so everyone in the room could see the people sitting at it. Perfect for what I had planned. All right. Tell Lori to put the best wine on their table and alert the staff. I'll be present in the lounge tonight, not just the kitchen. Rowan raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't ask any questions. Over the years of working together, my staff has learned to respect my privacy. Whatever you say, Mr. A, you got it. I spent the day doing the usual things, checking supplies, discussing new menu items with Rowan, dealing with administrative issues. But my thoughts kept returning to the evening ahead. I didn't plan to make a scene or publicly humiliate Merritt and Fletcher. I just wanted them to know the truth, on my terms, not theirs. By 7 o'clock, I went up to my apartment, showered, and changed into my only expensive suit, a dark blue tailored suit. Virginia had insisted on it years ago. "You're a restaurant owner, Birch, not a dishwasher. Have at least one decent suit," she'd said then. I rarely wore it, only on special occasions. Today was just such an occasion. When I got down to the restaurant, it was starting to fill up. Lori met me at the front of the room, her eyes widening at the sight of my suit. "Mr. Endicott, you look amazing," she was clearly surprised. "Thank you, Lori. Have the Hazeses arrived yet?" "Not yet. They have an 8 o'clock reservation and it's only 1:15 to 7 o'clock. "Good. Show them out when they get here and let me know." I made my way to the kitchen where Rowan and his team were in the midst of preparations. Seeing me, Rowan froze for a moment, then smiled broadly. "Wow, Mr. A. Did you decide to outshine everyone today?" "Just a special occasion," I replied, feeling a little awkward with all the attention. "Must be very special," he said, returning to his work. By 8 o'clock, the restaurant was full. I watched the room from a small gap in the door leading to the kitchen. At precisely 8 o'clock, the door opened, and in walked Merritt and Fletcher, followed by 2 other couples about their age. I recognized one of them, the same colleagues of Fletcher's I'd met at Ayla's birthday party. Ayla wasn't with them, which disappointed me a little. Lori greeted them with a professional smile and escorted them to table 9. Fletcher walked with an air of importance as if he owned the place, and Merritt looked around with that special mixture of criticism and admiration she always displayed in places she considered status. They sat down, and Brandon, one of our best waiters, immediately came over with a menu and wine list. I saw Fletcher smugly say something, probably bragging about his wine knowledge, and his guests nodded in agreement. I decided to wait until they had ordered and gotten their first courses before showing up. I didn't want to spoil their appetite before their time. 45 minutes later, when they were finishing their appetizers and starting the main courses, I adjusted my tie and went out into the hall. My plan was simple: walk up to their table as if I'd just noticed them, say hello and see what the reaction was. I wasn't going to make a scene, but I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized I was here too. I slowly made my way through the hall, saying hello to some of the regulars who looked surprised at my costume. I usually showed up at the lounge in simpler clothes. When I approached Merritt's table, they were engrossed in conversation and didn't notice me. Fletcher was telling a story, waving his arms, and the others were laughing. "Good evening," I said quietly. Merritt looked up and froze with her fork in her hand. Her face changed as if someone had turned off the lights from animated amusement to shock and horror in a split second. "Daddy." Her voice was almost a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Fletcher turned around, his smile gone. "Birch?" He looked just as shocked as Merritt. "What a surprise. I noticed you as I walked by and thought I'd say hello," I said, deliberately not answering Merritt's question directly. "I see you're celebrating Fletcher's promotion?" Merritt recovered quickly, her shock replaced by irritation. "Yes, we're having a family celebration." She glanced at her guests, who were watching us curiously. "I thought so." I nodded. "I'll leave you to it." I was about to move away, but Merritt stood up suddenly. "Daddy, can I talk to you for a minute?" She nodded toward the corridor leading to the restrooms. I followed her, feeling the stares of everyone at the table. As soon as we were out of hearing range, Merritt turned to me abruptly. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you following us?" "Of course not," I answered calmly. "I'm just having dinner here." "Dining?" She almost laughed. "Dad, this is one of the most expensive restaurants in town. You can't afford to dine here." "How do you know what I can afford and what I can't?" I asked, feeling the bitterness growing inside. "You've never taken an interest in my finances." "I know how much a cook makes in a place like this," she lowered her voice, as if she was afraid someone would hear. "And it's certainly not enough to eat dinner here. Stop it, Dad. You're embarrassing us." "I was just saying hello, Merritt. What's awkward about it?" "Everything." She waved her hand angrily. "Your age, your clothes." "What's wrong with my clothes?" I pointed to my suit. "It's Armani, by the way." She looked at me incredulously. "Where did you get the money for Armani?" "Maybe I'm not as poor as you think," I replied, feeling my patience wearing thin. "Stop it, Dad." She shook her head. "I've seen your apartment, your car. You're living on a pension and a cook's salary. Please go away. We're celebrating an important event and you're ruining it." I looked at my daughter and saw a stranger in front of me. Where is the little girl who asked me to read to her at bedtime? Who was proud when I taught her how to make her first pancakes? Who cried on my shoulder when she broke her knee? "Okay, Merritt," I said at last. "I'll leave. I won't ruin your evening." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. "Wait." Her voice softened. Did you order yet? Did you pay?" I realized what she was worried about. Not that I'd leave upset, but that I might have trouble paying the bill. "Don't worry about my finances, Merritt," I said coldly, releasing my hand. "I'll manage somehow." I headed back into the lounge, not toward the exit, but toward their table. Something clicked inside me, decades of suppressed bitterness and frustration. Maybe it was time to set the record straight. Merritt hurried after me, clearly concerned about what I was about to do. I walked over to their table and stood where I could see everyone. "I apologize for the interruption," I said politely. "I just wanted to wish everyone a pleasant evening." Fletcher forced a smile. "Thank you, Birch. Are you, leaving already?" "No," I smiled. "I'm not done here yet." Merritt, who was standing next to me, suddenly grabbed my elbow. "Dad, please," she hissed. "You're embarrassing us." "I'm embarrassing you?" I turned to her, feeling something break inside me. "By coming over to say hello to your own daughter? By pretending to be someone you're not?" Her voice became harsh. "You can't afford this place. A simple man like you—" She faltered, realizing she was speaking too loudly. People at the neighboring tables started to turn around. "Speak up, Merritt," I said quietly. "A simple man like me, what?" "Shouldn't be here," she finished, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Go away. You're embarrassing us." There was silence for a moment. I watched Fletcher's guests squirm awkwardly in their seats, not knowing where to avert their eyes. Fletcher looked at me with a strange satisfaction, as if he'd always expected me to be in this humiliating situation. "As you wish," I said at last, standing upright. "Have a good evening." I turned and headed not for the exit, but across the hall to the inconspicuous door that led to my office. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Merritt watching me with a puzzled look. In my office, I sat down at my desk and took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear or shame, but from adrenaline and anger. I never thought it would come to this, that my own daughter would publicly disown me. The intercom on the desk lit up, and Laurie's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Endicott, we have a little situation." "I know, Laurie," I interrupted her. "I created this situation myself." "What am I supposed to do about, table 9? I thought for a moment. "Serve them as usual. Let them enjoy their evening. When it's time for the check, give it to me." "If you say so, sir." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the monitors of the surveillance cameras set up in the room. On one of the screens I could see Merritt's table. She had returned to her seat, but she looked tense. Fletcher was saying something to her, probably trying to smooth over the awkwardness in front of the guests. The others pretended nothing had happened, but their laughter and conversation seemed strained. An hour later, as they finished dessert and coffee, I saw Brandon approach their table with a billfold. Fletcher held out his hand nonchalantly, but Brandon, as I'd instructed, softly addressed Merritt. "Madam, Mr. Endicott asked me to tell you that the bill is paid." Merritt looked puzzled. "Mr. Endicott?" she repeated. "You mean my father?" "Yes, ma'am." Brandon nodded. "Mr. Birch Endicott." "But how could he have paid?" Her face expressed utter bewilderment. "As the owner of the restaurant, madam," Brandon replied calmly, "Mr. Endicott has owned the old wharf for 26 years. I watched Merritt's face change from bewilderment to shock, from shock to disbelief, and finally to realization. She turned to Fletcher, who looked equally stunned. "There must be some mistake," Fletcher said, looking at Brandon incredulously. "Birch is a cook. He can't be the owner." "There's no mistake, sir." Laurie walked over to the table, having heard the conversation. "Mr. Endicott is the founder and sole owner of the old wharf. He is also the recipient of 2 Michelin stars and several national culinary awards." I've seen their guests exchange glances, a mixture of surprise and awkwardness. One of them, Harrison I think, leaned over and whispered something to his wife. "Where is he?" Merritt's voice was barely audible through the camera microphone. "In his office, ma'am," Laurie answered. "If you wish, I can show you out." Merritt stood up, her face pale. "Yes, please." I turned off the monitor and straightened up in my chair. A moment later there was a knock on the door and Laurie looked in. "Mr. Endicott, your daughter wants to talk to you." "Let her come in." I nodded. Merritt entered alone, leaving Fletcher and their guests in the hall. She stopped in the middle of the room, looking around. My office was spacious and elegant leather armchairs, an antique desk, walls hung with pictures of the restaurant over the years, and of course, my awards and diplomas. "All this time," she began, her voice shaking, "do you own this place?" "Yes," I answered simply, "since it opened." "But why didn't you ever tell us?" She looked lost, like a child who'd learned that Santa Claus didn't exist. "Did you ever ask?" I answered with a question. "Have you ever been interested in my life, Merritt? My work? My accomplishments?" She was silent, and I could see the different emotions struggling in her eyes: shock, disbelief, embarrassment, and maybe, somewhere deep down, shame. "All this time," I continued, "you and Fletcher have treated me like a poor relation, tolerated out of politeness. You were ashamed of me in front of your friends. You thought I lived on a pittance, and even that seemed too good for me." "I didn't—" She hesitated. "I wasn't ashamed of you. I just what, Merritt?" I got up from the table. "Just thought I wasn't good enough for your world? What does it mean to be a mere man who shouldn't be here?" She lowered her eyes. "That's not what I meant." "No, that's exactly what I meant." I walked over to the wall of pictures. "Look at this. Here's me and your mother at the restaurant opening. Here's me getting my first Michelin star. Here's a picture from the New York Times when they named Old Wharf one of the 10 best restaurants in the South. All of this happened while you were growing up. And not once, you never once asked me what I really did. You always said you were a chef." Her voice became defensive. "You never mentioned owning a restaurant. And you never asked," I repeated. "You just assumed I was a loser, and that suited your idea of me." She stood silent, not knowing what to say. Voices could be heard outside the door. Probably Fletcher and their guests were waiting in the hallway. "So what now?" she asked at last. "Did you set all this up to humiliate us? To get revenge?" I shook my head, feeling suddenly tired. "No, Merritt. I just wanted you to know the truth, so you could see who I really am, not who you made up in your head. So you'd realize how much it hurts when your own daughter shames you for something you never were. Something flashed in her eyes. Maybe realization. Maybe remorse. But then the door opened and Fletcher walked in, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "What kind of game are you playing, Birch?" he almost shouted. "You've made fools of us in front of my colleagues." "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "You chose this restaurant. I just said hello to you, and your wife publicly disowned me. Everything else is a natural consequence." Fletcher opened his mouth to say something, but Merritt stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Wait," she said, not taking her eyes off me. "All this time, all these years, you've been successful, rich, and you didn't tell us." "Why would I tell you?" I asked. "So you'd love me for my money, for my status, for what I could give you, not for who I am." "But you gave Ayla money for college," she said, and I realized she was already putting the pieces of the puzzle together. "It was you, wasn't it? That anonymous foundation?" I didn't answer, but my look said it all for me. "Oh my God!" She sank into the chair in front of my desk. "All this time!" Fletcher shifted his gaze from me to Merritt, his anger changing to calculated interest. "So you really own all of this?" He circled the room, implying the entire restaurant. How successful are you? Typical Fletcher, always thinking about money and status." "Enough," I answered succinctly. "But if you're hoping this is going to change our relationship in any way, you're wrong." "What do you mean?" Merritt looked up. "I mean that I'm not going to suddenly become a beloved father-in-law and father just because you found out I'm not a poor old man. All I ever wanted from you was respect and love for who I am, not what I have, and you both failed that test." Lori knocked on the door and looked inside. "Excuse me, Mr. Endicott, but Mr. Hayes's guests are asking if they're leaving." Fletcher turned toward the door, clearly annoyed that their conversation had been interrupted. "Tell them we'll be right there," he said sharply. "This isn't your restaurant, Mr. Hayes." Lori's voice was polite but firm. "I'm asking for Mr. Endicott." Fletcher looked as if he'd been punched. His face flushed even more. "Tell them the evening's over, Lori," I said. "Show them out and call a cab if you need one." "Yes, Mr. Endicott." She nodded and closed the door. Merritt looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Shock, disbelief, maybe even some respect. "What now?" she asked quietly. "Now you know the truth," I answered, sitting back down at the table. "The rest is up to you." For the next 2 days I ignored the phone. Merritt called every few hours, leaving messages that gradually changed in tone from excuses to annoyance. I didn't answer. What could I say to her? 26 years of silence couldn't be fixed with one conversation. Instead, I immersed myself in my work. The season was in full swing. Tourists were filling North Little Rock, and the old wharf was more popular than ever. I spent my days in the kitchen helping Rowan with the new summer menu and my evenings in my office dealing with the backlog of paperwork. On the 3rd day after the incident, Rowan knocked on my office door. "Mr. A," he looked a little concerned, "there's a girl asking for you. Says she's your granddaughter." I looked up from my papers. "Ayla? Is she here?" "Yeah, she's waiting at the service entrance. Said she didn't want to be seen in the hall." That was unexpected. After what happened, I thought Ayla would avoid me too, following her parents' example. "Show her out." I put my pen away and straightened up in my chair. A moment later, the door opened again and Ayla walked in. She didn't look as confident as usual, jeans instead of her usual elegant outfit, her hair in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup. She fidgeted nervously with the strap of her bag. "Hi, Grandpa." Her voice was quiet, almost guilty. "Ayla." I stood up, walking around the table. "I didn't expect to see you. Mom doesn't know I'm here." She glanced quickly at the door as if she was afraid Merritt might suddenly appear. "I told her I was going to meet some friends." "I see." I pointed to the chair across the table. "Have a seat. Would you like something? Tea? Coffee?" No, thanks. She sat down, still nervous. Yeah, I came to apologize. For what happened. For Mom and Dad. For everything. I returned to my chair, watching her closely. Unlike Merritt, Ayla looked genuinely upset. You have nothing to apologize for, I said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. But I'm a part of this, she looked up at me. All these years I've treated you like a poor old man to be put up with, too. I didn't realize who you really were. Because I never told you, I smiled slightly. And that was my choice, Ayla. Don't blame yourself. She shook her head, not accepting my excuse. After what happened, Mom told me everything. That you owned the old wharf. That you were rich. She said the last word almost in a whisper, like it was a secret. I couldn't believe it. All this time. All this time, I've been the same person, I finished for her, just with slightly different circumstances than you thought. But why? She leaned forward. Why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let Mom and Dad treat you like that? So dismissive? I suggested. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. It's awful. I feel so guilty. I sighed, looking at the picture of Virginia on the table. What would she say now? Probably that it was time for the truth. The whole truth. Listen, Ayla, I'm going to tell you a story. Not about how I got rich. That's not that interesting. It's about why I chose to keep it from you. I got up and walked over to the little bar in the corner of the study. Sure you don't want anything? I have some excellent apple cider. Non-alcoholic, I added, seeing her hesitation. Okay, she smiled weakly. Cider sounds good. I poured 2 glasses and returned to the table, handing one to her. When I was young, about your age, I worked as an assistant cook in a small restaurant in Memphis. It didn't pay much, but I loved to cook. That's where I met your grandmother Virginia, I smiled at the memory. She was a waitress, working part-time during the summers between semesters at college. The prettiest girl I'd ever seen. And smart. She was studying pedagogy, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Ayla listened attentively, forgetting her cider. We fell in love, married a year later. She finished college and I continued to work in the kitchens, gaining experience. When your mom was born, it was hard for us. I was working 2 jobs. Virginia was an elementary school teacher. Money was barely enough. I took a sip of cider, gathering my thoughts. Merritt grew up seeing us struggle, seeing how we counted every dime, how we denied ourselves everything so she could have the essentials. It shaped her. She became obsessed with getting out, with being rich, with status. She was ashamed of us, her ordinary parents. How could this have happened? Ayla asked quietly. How could she be ashamed of you when you had done so much for her? It's easy when you're 12 and all your classmates come to school in designer clothes and you're in something your mother restitched from old clothes. I shook my head. I don't blame her. Kids are cruel, and teenagers especially so. I walked over to the window, looking out at the river glistening in the afternoon sunlight. Everything changed when I won a regional cooking competition. The grand prize was modest, but with it came a grant to open my own restaurant and an internship with a famous chef in New Orleans. For the first time in my life, I had money and opportunity. The old wharf? Ayla guessed. Yes, I nodded. I opened it 26 years ago. The area was an industrial zone back then and real estate was cheap. I took a risk, and the risk paid off. I went back to the table and sat down, looking at my granddaughter. The restaurant became a success almost immediately. I was in the right place at the right time. The wave of interest in Southern food was just beginning. 3 years later, we had our first Michelin star. 5 years later, we had an article in the New York Times. The money was flowing. And you didn't tell your mom? Ayla looked puzzled. Why? I sighed, thinking back to the moment when Virginia and I had made that decision. By then, Merritt was already in college, on a scholarship that I was secretly paying for. She rarely came home, always finding reasons to stay on campus for weekends and holidays. When she did come, she only talked about her status friends, their rich families, the life she wanted for herself. I paused, choosing my words. One day she brought Fletcher to meet us. He was, just like he is now, self-righteous, superficial, obsessed with status. They appraised our house together, our furniture, our clothes. I could see the contempt in their eyes. "Oh, Grandpa," Ayla lowered her gaze, clearly embarrassed. At that moment I realized that if I told them the truth, that I was a successful restaurant owner, that we had money, their attitude would instantly change. They will smile, flatter, try to capitalize. But it would be fake. So I decided not to tell. "And Grandma? Did she agree?" "Not right away," I smiled, remembering our arguments with Virginia. She thought we should be honest, give Merritt a chance to change, but I insisted. "Let's see who she chooses," I said. "Us, just plain parents who love her for who she is, or the status and money she craves." I fell silent and Ayla finished for me, and she chose status. "Yes," I nodded. "After she married Fletcher, she almost stopped visiting us. When you were born, she brought you back every few months, usually when they needed money. I gave, no questions asked. Virginia traveled to see you more often, tried to keep in touch, but Merritt always kept her distance." I went to the closet and pulled out a photo album. "When your grandmother was diagnosed, Merritt didn't visit much. Too busy," she said. "Too much work." Virginia didn't blame her, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I opened the scrapbook to a page with a picture of Virginia in a hospital room, smiling despite her illness. "In her last days, she had made me promise not to leave you. There are blood, Birch," she said. "The only thing left after us." Ayla picked up the album, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of the photograph. "I barely remember my grandmother," she whispered. "I was 5 when she died. She loved you very much," I said softly. "She always carried your picture with her." Ayla turned the page, and there was a picture of little Ayla on Virginia's lap. "After she died," I continued, "Merritt helped me sell the house." "It's too big for you alone, Daddy," she said. By then I had this apartment above the restaurant, but I didn't tell her. I gave the money from the sale of the house to her, for Ayla's education. In fact, I'd already set up a trust fund for you, which paid for half of your college tuition. Ayla looked up, shocked. "What? But Mom and Dad said they paid for my college, with the help of Dad's parents." "They paid for part of it," I shrugged. "The rest was me, through an anonymous trust fund. Your parents never found out." "Oh my God," she covered her face with her hands. "Everything I knew, everything I believed in, was a lie." "Not lies." I put my hand gently down on her shoulder. "Just not the whole truth. I didn't want you to get between me and your parents. I didn't want you to feel guilty or obligated." She shook her head, clearly shaken. "And all these years you've just put up with their attitude? Their neglect?" "I made my choice," I answered simply. "And it had its own freedom. I could be myself without worrying that people liked me for my money or status. I had real friends, real relationships with my employees, my customers, my suppliers, people who appreciated me for who I was. We didn't," she lowered her eyes. "We only valued what we thought you could give us, which, as it turned out, was a tiny fraction of what you actually had." "You were a child, Ayla," I squeezed her hand. "You were just following your parents' lead. And now?" She looked at me. "I'm not a child now. I'm 23. And I feel like I've been living my whole life wrong, with the wrong values, the wrong goals." She was silent, and I could see the inner struggle in her eyes. "Did Mom call you?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, many times," I nodded. I didn't answer. "And rightly so," she pressed her lips together. "You know what she said when we got home after that dinner? 'Can you believe your grandfather was rich all this time and hid it from us, to think how much he could have done for us?' I chuckled bitterly, but I wasn't surprised. It was so like Merritt. And what did Fletcher say? He was furious. Ayla shook her head. Not because of the way they treated you, but because you tricked them. Like you were obligated to tell them about your money so they could, I don't know, use you? And what do you think about all that? I asked, watching her closely. She thought for a moment, then raised a clear gaze to me. I think you were right to hide the truth. And I think Mom and Dad's reaction just proves it. They're not remorseful for the way they treated you. They're just angry that they missed out on an opportunity to take advantage. I felt a surge of pride in my granddaughter. Despite her upbringing, she retained the ability to see the truth. What are you going to do now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I can't look at my parents the way I used to. Not after what I found out. But I can't just walk away. You don't have to, I shrugged. They're your parents, whatever they are. I never wanted you to turn your back on them because of me. It's not about you, she shook her head. It's about who they are. It's about their values, the way they treat people. I don't want to be like that. I looked at my granddaughter with growing respect. There was something of Virginia about her. The same directness, the same clarity of thought. You know, I said thoughtfully, I've always had my hands full in restaurant marketing. Rowan is brilliant in the kitchen, but we're behind in social media. If you ever want to try something new. Her eyes widened. Are you offering me a job? Just an option, I shrugged. There's no pressure. You can think about it. She hesitated, then smiled. I'll think about it. Thank you. We sat in silence for a while, each absorbed in our own thoughts. Finally, Ayla put the empty glass on the table and stood up. I have to go. My parents will be asking where I am. Sure, I got up too. Thank you for coming, Ayla. It means a lot to me. She hugged me, and I felt that this hug was different from all the previous ones, more sincere, more warm. No, thank you, she said, pulling away, for telling me the truth, and for giving me a chance to be a better person. I walked her to the service exit, watching her walk away down the narrow alley toward the main road. Something was different today, not just for her, but for me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was keeping the promise I'd made to Virginia not to leave our family, at least the part of it that was open to a real relationship. Back in the study, I noticed that Ayla had left a brooch on the desk, the same one I'd given her for her birthday. There was a note next to it. I'll clean it and wear it proudly. Thank you for reminding me of what really matters. I picked up the brooch, and a ray of sunlight coming through the window made the silver and pearls shine. Like Virginia once had, I now saw hope in the next generation of our family. The phone rang again, another call from Merritt. This time I didn't immediately reject it, but I didn't answer it either. Let her suffer a little longer. I needed time to decide how to proceed. With Ayla, it was clear. She was worthy of the truth and my trust. With Merritt and Fletcher, I wasn't so sure. 26 years of deceit on my part and neglect on theirs had created a chasm that might be impossible to bridge. But talking to Ayla tonight gave me hope that at least some of my family could be saved. And maybe that's enough. The week after my conversation with Ayla flew by with the usual worries. The restaurant ran like clockwork. The summer season was in full swing, and I had almost no time to think about my family drama. Almost. Merritt kept calling, but less frequently. Her messages became more and more irritated. Dad, this is ridiculous. We need to talk. You can't ignore us forever. Fletcher thinks you're being childish. That last one especially made me laugh. Fletcher calling someone else infantile. Ayla came by twice. The first time was to return the brooch she'd cleaned and show me how well it looked on her blouse. The second time was to bring her resume and portfolio. She was really interested in my job offer. I haven't told my parents yet, she admitted as we discussed her possible duties. They think I'm just going out with friends. You're an adult, Ayla, I reminded her. You don't have to report to them every step of the way. I know, she sighed, but they're complicated, especially now. Mom talks about you all the time, about how you tricked us all, how you hid your wealth. Dad makes plans, they whisper in the evenings. I wasn't surprised. Knowing Merritt and Fletcher, it was obvious that they wouldn't leave a suddenly discovered rich relative alone. Be careful, was all I said, and remember that you mustn't come between us. Sunday morning, when the restaurant was closed, I enjoyed a rare moment of silence on the balcony of my apartment. The river glistened in the morning sun. Seagulls circled over the water, searching for breakfast. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I heard the doorbell ring. Ayla had said she'd come at noon so we could discuss the details of her future work. But it was only 10:30 now. Who would come at this hour? When I opened the door, I froze in place. On the threshold stood Merritt and Fletcher, both dressed too formally for a Sunday morning. Merritt held a basket of fruit and a bottle of wine, obviously a gift. "Daddy," she tried to smile, but the smile came out strained. "We finally found you." "You were looking for me?" I didn't invite them in, staying in the doorway. "That's strange because I haven't disappeared, and you know where I live and work." Fletcher cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Birch, we're here to talk. Why don't you invite us in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, but another part of me was curious. What would they say? How would they try to justify their behavior? And most importantly, what did they really want? "Come in." I stepped back, allowing them into the apartment. They entered, looking around with poorly concealed surprise. My apartment wasn't luxurious by the standards of the rich, but it was spacious and elegant, with antique furniture that Virginia and I had collected over the years and a view of the river that many people would give a fortune for. "What a unusual place," Merritt said, setting the basket on the coffee table. "We didn't know you had such a big apartment." "There's a lot you didn't know about me," I replied, pointing to the couch. "Have a seat." "Coffee?" "Yes, please." Merritt sat down, straightening the folds in her overly formal dress. Fletcher settled down beside her, his face a mask of restrained politeness. I went into the kitchen to make coffee, but what I really needed was a moment to gather my thoughts. I knew this conversation would happen sooner or later, but I hadn't expected them to show up unannounced, with gifts and fake smiles. When I returned with the tray, I placed 3 cups on the table and sat down across from them. "So," I began, "to what do I owe the visit?" Merritt and Fletcher exchanged glances as if deciding who would speak first. Finally, Merritt coughed. "Dad, we came to apologize." She tried to make her voice sound sincere. "For the way we behaved, for not appreciating you all these years. And for that incident at the restaurant," Fletcher added. "It was unacceptable of us." I stared at them, trying to see some real remorse, but all I saw was calculation. They'd rehearsed that speech, prepared that apology, not because they were truly sorry, but because they wanted something to gain. "Well," I said, sipping my coffee, "apology accepted. Is that all?" Merritt looked a little confused. Obviously, she had expected a warmer reaction. "No, that's not all," she leaned forward. "Daddy, we want to start over. As a family, we've been apart for too long." "And whose fault was that?" I asked calmly. "All of us," Fletcher answered quickly. "We all made mistakes. You hid your success from us. We didn't pay enough attention to you." "Didn't pay attention." What an elegant euphemism for treated like dirt underfoot. "It's interesting that your desire for a fresh start didn't come until after you found out about my financial situation," I remarked. "That's not true," Merritt protested, but her eyes avoided my gaze. "We've been wanting to have a relationship for a long time. It's just that this incident was the catalyst." "A catalyst," I repeated. "That's a good word. Well, let's be honest with each other for once. Why are you really here?" They exchanged glances again, and this time Fletcher took the lead. "Birch, we really want to mend the relationship. You're Merritt's father, Ayla's grandfather. Family's important. Family is important, I echoed. Wasn't it important 26 years ago? Or 10 years ago when Virginia was dying? Merritt turned a little pale. Dad, that's not fair. We had our own lives, our own problems. We all have problems, Merritt, I interrupted. But a family supports each other in times of need, at least a real family. That's why we're here. Fletcher tried to get the conversation back on track. To be a real family. And, we have problems too. Financial. That's it. The real reason they're here. Really? I acted surprised. I thought you had a solid pension fund and were going to retire by 60. Fletcher blushed, remembering his boastful words at Ayla's birthday party. Well, the market's unstable, he shrugged. And our house. Mortgage went up as rates went up. And Fletcher's car needs serious repairs, Merritt added. And then there's the taxes. And you thought that now that you knew about my money, I should solve your problems? I set my cup aside. That's an interesting approach to relationship building. No, Merritt shook her head. We're not asking for money, it's just, maybe you could give Fletcher a position at the restaurant, something administrative. He's a great manager. I almost laughed. Fletcher, who had never worked in the restaurant business, was suddenly a great manager. I have a full staff, I replied, and all of my employees are qualified and dedicated. I'm not going to fire someone to hire a son-in-law who, until last week, didn't even know the name of my restaurant. But we are a family, Merritt insisted. Shouldn't a family support each other? That's exactly what I'm saying, I said, stepping forward. Where was that support when your mother was dying? Where was that support when I was alone? Where was that support all these years when you treated me like a burden? Merritt looked like I hit her. This is different, she mumbled. With what? I didn't back down. Because then you thought I was a poor old man with nothing to take from you. And now that you know I have money, you suddenly think of family values. You're being unfair. Fletcher was beginning to lose patience. We came in peace, apologizing, and you're accusing us of all sins. I'm just stating the facts, I said calmly, and the main fact is that you are not here because of love or remorse. You're here for money. That's not true, Merritt exclaimed, but her voice trembled. Then prove it, I shrugged my shoulders. Leave now. No money, no job, no promises of financial help. Just walk away and think about whether you want a relationship with me, a human being, not a wallet. They were silent, clearly unprepared for this turn. Do you want us to leave? Merritt looked confused. I want you to be honest, I answered. For once in your life, you came for the money. Admit it, and we can move on. Fletcher was the first to break the silence. Okay, he said abruptly. Yes, we were hoping for financial help. Is that so terrible? You're rich, we're stranded. You could help if you wanted to. Fletcher, Merritt hissed, but it was too late. No, let him speak, I nodded. At last we were getting to the truth. Fletcher, seeing that the mask of politeness was no longer necessary, continued with growing irritation. Yes, we're in debt. Yes, we need money. But you know what? It's your fault too. If you had been honest with us from the beginning, if you hadn't played those silly hide-and-seek games with your wealth, we could have avoided a lot of problems. How? I was genuinely curious. Would you have lived off me? We would have made better financial decisions, he parried, knowing that we had support, that we don't have to show off to everyone we meet, proving our status. So the problem isn't that you're living beyond your means, but that I haven't told you about my money? I shook my head. Interesting logic. Listen, Birch. Fletcher leaned forward, his face red with anger. You've been playing us. All these years you've watched us struggle and done nothing. You could have helped Merritt with the business, could have given Ayla a better education, I gave Ayla a better education, I interrupted him. I paid for half of her college through a trust fund. What? Fletcher looked stunned. What? You heard me, I shrugged. While you were telling everyone what generous parents you were, I was quietly paying the bills. No recognition, no thanks. Because I cared about Ayla, not what people would think. Merritt covered her face with her hands. I can't believe it, she muttered. All this time. Yes, all this time, I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Now, if you really want a relationship with me, start by being honest. Admit that you've treated me horribly, that you didn't come here today for reconciliation, you came here for money, and maybe then we can start something new, but not before. Fletcher stood up too, his face contorted with anger. You think you're so righteous, so morally superior. You've been lying to us for 26 years. 26 years of pretense and manipulation. I didn't lie, I objected calmly. I just didn't tell the whole truth, and I did it to see who you really are. Well, now I know. Come on, Merritt. Fletcher grabbed her arm, lifting her off the couch. Your father is obviously not interested in reconciliation. He just wants to continue his games of moral superiority. Merritt stood up, her eyes full of tears from anger or frustration. I couldn't tell. Is this your last word, Daddy? She asked in a trembling voice. Won't you help us? I looked at my daughter, and for a moment I saw in her the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders, who I taught to bake cookies, the one I read bedtime stories to. But that little girl was long gone, and before me stood a woman who had been ashamed of her father for 26 years until she found out he was rich. I will help you, I said at last. But not with money. I'm going to help you realize that there are more important things in life than money and status. And when you realize that, if you do, then we can talk again. It's pointless. Fletcher pulled Merritt toward the door. He's not going to help us. He's enjoying our problems. This is his revenge. No, Fletcher, I shook my head. This isn't revenge. It's a lesson. The same lesson I'd been trying to teach all these years. A man's true worth isn't in his wallet or his status. It's in his character, his actions, his ability to love and care for others without expectation of reward. Let's go. Fletcher gritted his teeth, practically dragging Merritt out the door. Dad? She turned around at the last moment, her face a mixture of anger and despair. You're going to regret this. We're the only family you have. No, Merritt, I smiled sadly. My real family is the people who love me for who I am, not for what I have. And thankfully, I have people like that in my life. The door slammed behind them, and I was alone in the silence of my apartment. I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction from this breakup. Only a quiet sadness and, strangely, relief. As if the heaviness I had carried all these years had finally disappeared. Ayla came 2 hours later, as we had agreed. I didn't tell her about my parents' visit. I didn't want to embarrass her. Instead, we discussed her future job at the restaurant, her ideas for revamping our social media presence, and possible collaborations with local farmers for special events. You look different today, Grandpa, she remarked at one point. Did something happen? Just made an important decision, I replied. Nothing special. After she left, I called my attorney, Morris Taylor, with whom I had worked for 20 years. Morris, I need to change my will, I said without preamble. How soon can you get here? Is it urgent, Birch? I could hear the concern in his voice. Are you all right? I'm fine, I grinned. It's just time to make some changes. Is tomorrow okay with you? Sure, he agreed. I'll be at your office at 10. The next day, Morris arrived right on time with a briefcase full of papers and a worried look on his face. So, Birch, he began as we settled into my office, what changes do you want to make? I explained my decision. I wanted to leave the bulk of the business, including the restaurant and real estate, to Rowan, who had worked with me for 9 years and was like a son to me, on the condition that 20% of the shares would go to Ayla if she worked at the restaurant for at least 3 years and learned all aspects of the business. And Merritt? Morris asked, making notes. In the previous version, she was the primary beneficiary. Merritt will receive a sum of money, I answered. Enough to pay off her debts and live comfortably but not luxuriously, and on the condition that the money be paid monthly in small installments through a trust fund to be administered by you. Morris raised an eyebrow. You want to make sure she doesn't squander it all at once? I want to make sure Fletcher doesn't get his hands on the whole amount, I corrected. He's terrible with money, and I don't want Merritt to end up on the street when he blows it all on another investment of the century. Morris nodded, understanding. Did something happen between you two? He asked. You never spoke of Fletcher. Like that. I sighed and briefly recounted the events of the last few weeks, the scene at the restaurant, the conversation with Ayla, Merritt, and Fletcher's visit yesterday. I don't mean to be cruel, I finished. But I can't reward that kind of behavior, and I want to protect those who have truly cared for me all these years. I understand, Morris nodded. And frankly, it sounds reasonable. You're not disinheriting Merritt completely, but you're not encouraging her questionable values. We spent the next hour detailing the terms of the new will. When everything was agreed, Morris promised to have the documents ready by the end of the week. You know, Birch, he said, gathering up his papers, I've always admired the way you've conducted your affairs. Honest, dignified, no showboating. Your daughter lost a lot by not getting to know you. Thank you, Morris. I shook his hand. It means a lot to me. After he left, I went up to the restaurant kitchen where Rowan was experimenting with a new recipe. Mr. A, he smiled when he saw me. It's about time. Try this. He handed me a spoonful of some kind of sauce. I tasted it, a perfect balance of sour and sweet with a hint of an unusual spice. Cardamom? I asked, and Rowan smiled broadly. And a little coriander for the new duck dish. Genius, I patted him on the shoulder. You've got real talent, lad. Learn from the best, he shrugged, turning back to the stove. I watched him, his confident movements, the way he led the kitchen staff, firm but respectful. There was something about him that Fletcher never had, a genuine passion for what he did and a concern for the people around him. Ayla appeared in the doorway, already wearing an apron with the restaurant's logo on it. Grandpa, I finished the first draft of the new menu for the website. She handed me a clipboard. What do you think? I looked over her work. Clean, modern design, great photos of the dishes, short but appetizing descriptions. Great work for a first day. Impressive, I nodded. You have an eye for detail. She glowed with praise, and I saw in her smile a reflection of Virginia, the same joy of a job well done, the same desire for perfection. In that moment, standing in the kitchen of my restaurant with Rowan at the stove and Ayla by my side, I felt a strange calm. Yes, I had lost my daughter, or rather, I recognized that I had lost her long ago. But I had a different family around me, people who appreciated me for who I was, not my bank account. Rowan, who always treated me with respect and care, even when he thought I was just an old cook. Ayla, who found the courage to reconsider the values instilled in her by her parents. Lori, Brandon, Jenny, Tommy, all the people who made up my second family over the years. Maybe Virginia was right when she said that family is the most important thing. But she didn't elaborate that true family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people we choose, the people who choose us. That evening, as the restaurant closed, I sat in my office looking through old photographs. Virginia with little Merritt in her arms, the three of us on a picnic by the river, a restaurant opening, Merritt's high school graduation, Ayla's birth. So many memories, so many missed opportunities, but also so many new beginnings. Ayla finding her place in the restaurant. Rowan, ready to take up the baton when the time is right. A new generation, new traditions. I closed the album and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city reflected in the dark water of the river. At 71, I had finally found what I had been looking for all my life: not wealth, not recognition, but a simple understanding of what really matters. Who really matters?